Maybe let me start with the conclusion we had from the voting this morning. 50% of people who voted are not convinced that we will have an energy system based on 100% renewable sources in 2050. Rudy van Beurden, is that something that surprises you?
It surprises me, no and yes, because I think a lot of people in the room are not making a distinction between electricity and energy. So we heard this morning from a person sitting next to me how we could go to a fully renewable electricity production by 2050. We did not see it, how it could happen for all the rest. So, and what is renewable? Because renewable is often linked to solar and wind. Renewable, I think, is much broader. We saw it also now. So in that sense, I think, yes, 100% renewable for electricity production. For all the rest, I have also my doubts, but I don't know it.
Same question for you, Gauthier. Were you surprised?
I think that I agree with Rudy, is that what we've seen in the past, somehow, with the decrease of cost of renewable, I think that now we can see that the electricity system, at least as it is today, we can reach that full decarbonization. How we can make it for the other sector, there's still a lot of unknowns. We have to progress in the other renewable technologies. I think that in terms of collecting biomass or biogas, we are really at the beginning. And still in country like Belgium or the Benelux, I mean, are the potential enough in order to supply? Will we have to resort to other sort of export and so on? Those are not yet defined. And I guess that also finally, energy efficiency has always been very hype in all the targets, but in the 2020 targets, that's usually the point where it's also missing. So, I mean, given what we just observed for the last decade, I'm not too surprised, but okay, there's still a pathway to achieve, and I hope that we can make that transition successful.
Bram, Claes, same question for you. We saw that after your talk and Gauthier, there were a bit more people who were on the yes side, but what do you think about the results?
Well, is this microphone working?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. I wasn't totally surprised. I was happy to see the evolution after our talk, so that was interesting. It would be interesting to do the same poll now after Peter's presentation. But I think one of the reasons is that we've only recently really started to tackle the heating sector from a renewable energy point of view, as well as the transport sector. And I think especially the transport sector, we haven't had the best experiences. We, in the beginning, thought that the panacea, which would save us all, would be biofuels. But that hasn't been a resounding success, and now we're looking more towards other solutions. And I think that electric vehicle transport for people, for personal transport, will be much more important, but we've got some and a lot of important catching up to do. So that is really problematic, and I think some of the reasons why, especially in Belgium with the transport system that we have, is one of the reasons why people might be skeptical. And then the second big unknown, I think, is industry. I think there's a lot of good work that has been done by Peter's members in thinking about how that transition might happen, but we don't quite yet see it in practice enough. And it's a very big part of the energy consumption. And so imagining how the Port of Antwerp is going to go fully renewable or decarbonized is a very big challenge. So I think we've only recently, through the work of the VUB and others, started to really tackle that. So we've got a lot of work there. I'm much more optimistic on the electric side and also on the heating side. Personally, I think there are two ways of looking at this. Our building stock is hugely inefficient, which is a very, very big problem, but that's also an opportunity to address it. And the technologies are there. There's district heating, and there's heat pumps, there's solar thermal, and maybe a role for biomass as well.
Peter, talking about the industry, how optimistic are you?
Well,
as I showed you, it is technically possible to do 100% renewables in 2050. There are
But it's always
solutions.
what is the reasonable cost, of course.
But then it is that the question is double. Is society ready to pay the investments and the money that is needed to do it? And two, can we avoid the competitive disadvantages if the whole world does not follow? I mean, there are two ways, Bram, of decarbonizing the Antwerp port. Either you say to the industry, go away, or you say, stay, reduce your carbon emissions, and stay competitive. And there is a thin line between reducing that CO2 emissions, carbon emissions in general, and staying competitive. And again, I don't think it's in your interest, and I don't think it's your objective either to say, well, you just go away and produce some things very well. So we have to push everybody to invest in these new technologies, and this is best done on a global level.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, from your experience, how far is the industry in the rest of Europe in decarbonizing?
I think good question, and I think even chatting earlier on, I think industry is going to be one of the biggest. It's quite a challenge to decarbonize, and it's a really fair point that if one country or one particular industry moves first, then if its costs increase, it becomes less competitive. And yeah, so I think that's quite industry will be a really difficult challenge. But kind of coming back to the point around will we be fully renewable by 2050? I think there's every opportunity for us to get close to that. But I think fundamentally, there is a lot of cost associated to get there. And I think governments are aware of that, but not quite figured out how best to get around that. I think customers need to become a bit more aware of this is a challenge and these costs do need to get passed on. Otherwise, it'll be quite difficult to shift away from gas. What we see in the UK and other countries now is there's a lot more interaction between the electricity and gas sides. So I think they're starting to realise that if everything becomes electrified, we might well need some gas in the short term or long term to support the peaks. Power to gas, there's just more interlinkages now between the vectors, and I think as we see more joint thinking around this, we could potentially get there.
Mm-hmm. Bram?
Yeah, I think we really need to get past this position of, oh, we're not going to do anything because nobody else is doing anything, and we're going to chase all the industry away. That's really not a productive starting point, and it's also not the reality, because I think the reality is that the investments are not happening here because of all sorts of reasons. And what we need to do is attract investments, which actually recently the Port of Antwerp has been quite successful at. So we need to steer the investments that are happening in the right direction, instead of pretending that nobody else is happening, because we're risking to actually miss the opportunities that are now causing the Asian economies to grow and not ours.
Let's move on to the subject of gas. Stephen, we saw in your presentation that gas will remain important if it were not for the residential sector until 2050. Do you think 100% green gas is possible till 2050?
I don't think so. I think it's certainly we're seeing hydrogen, green gas injection becoming a lot more, certainly more talked about, a lot more innovation, a lot more projects looking at this. But I think fundamentally we're limited by the amount of green gas we can generate, and the amount of gas becomes the more some of the pipes might need changed, appliances need some reconfigurations as well. So yeah, I think 100% hydrogen, of course, as a gas industry would be quite an attractive option to get to, and a great alternative to electrification of everything. But I think that I do think we need both. I think it's not going to be electrify everything, and it's not going to be 100% gas. I think we need an electricity side, so it's looking at energy rather than just one or the other.
Gas as an alternative for electrification, that's also your point of view, Rudy?
Well, it's a question that, let's say, that is interesting, and we don't have the answer. Anybody here has the answer to that. Probably there's not a possibility to have green gas. The problem that I see today is that we now are focusing on 2050, which is good, But then we are putting forward some technical solutions, like electrical vehicles, electrical heat pumps, which are avoiding that people are now investing in technologies which are maybe not perfect, but who are contributing to the reduction in CO2. For example, electrical vehicles. I have a friend who has a Tesla. He's very lucky. But I have also friends who cannot afford to buy a Tesla. They are in a diesel car, and they are now probably on the street. If they would go to a natural gas vehicle today, which is not more costly, we would save a lot. But we are not promoting this because then we go into a deadlock. We don't know. Because if hydrogen becomes a fuel, then we still have these type of engines or fuel cells. And anyhow, a car is not living for 30 or 40 years. So this is just an example. And the same is with the heating sector. Today, gas is providing a lot of flexibility to the energy sector. And if, for example, you say you need an electrical heat pump, which is mainly used in wintertime, in the morning and in the evening, when there's no sun, what do? We will say, well, we will use the energy of the summer, which we will then convert power to gas, and then gas to power. But that's not efficient neither, because you lose efficiency. So I think we have to look at the whole system and see what are the advantages and disadvantages of each energy vector. And I think we have to look into that. And the advantage of gas is that the network is there. We don't need to invest, because sometimes they said we want to invest. No, let's use what we have. I learned when I was a small child, don't waste anything. We are in a society which is wasting a lot of things. We have to recycle, but also recycle the grids. We are not selling natural gas. We have infrastructure, TSOs and DSOs. Let's use it. It's highly interconnected. The market is integrated. And so these are all advantages we should use. And we have to look at it as a whole. And this is what is missing. And this is also what we should advocate as a gas sector. That's also why I'm going more now to conferences where electrical people are, because they are forgetting about it. So we have to do things together. It's a puzzle, and we are all part of this puzzle.
Gauthier, gas as an alternative for electrification, can we have your views?
Yeah, I think that when you look at all the energy demands, it's clear that you cannot have just one energy vector that can supply all. All those energy demands have their own pattern. Will it be winter versus summer? Can they accommodate some flexibility and so on? And I do agree that if we go just to full electricity and maybe having hydrogen as a way to transport electricity during winter to summer, there it's where we start to see a high impact on land users. And I guess that I really think that if we need to go to full decarbonization, we need at least three pillars, we need to be more efficient, be strong in energy efficiency. We need some sort of electrification, because some energy needs are good to be put on the electricity sector, but we need also some bioenergy, and biogas is clearly one of the vectors over there. And I think, okay, now it's maybe not as strongly promoted as it has been for electricity, but I think that at least now Engie is investing also into it, and we will see coming as also an alternative way to decarbonize our whole energy system as a whole.
Peter Claes, if we talk about a CO2 neutral society, how important is the natural gas still for the Belgian industry, and what is your perspective?
Well, as I showed you, we still use a lot of gas. We use a lot of it for producing heat, most of it. I think we have to start by using that as efficiently as possible. Cogeneration remains the best way of using gas when you want to produce electricity with it, through the need of heat, of course. It would be not wise to produce the heat if you don't need it. So you really have to look at the need heats. The use as a raw material is a special case. It is possible to produce, for instance, ammonia with other technologies than natural gas, but it costs a lot of money. You can use it. You can do it with bacteria or biotechnology, but it's much more expensive. So I think where we stand today, and that is the nice thing with technology. 15 years ago, a smartphone was an exception. Today, it is more powerful than the computer in a space shuttle. The speed at which technology can change things is enormous. And if you ask me what will we do in the next 10 years in Belgium, yes, of course, we will be using gas as a major source of energy, specifically if we do want to continue with closure of nuclear plants, because the technology is not mature to do it with anything else, or you go back to coal, or you find solutions with biomass, or you build high mountains to have hydro, which is probably not very realistic. What is going to happen in 2050? Technically, you can say what is possible today. I don't know what is going to be possible in 2050. But if you want to decarbonize, the gas you're going to use, either it will be biogas, green gas, or you will have capture and storage in order to get the CO2 back into the ground.
And this is possible in the Belgian industry?
For industry, this is not possible today or not affordable, but by 2050, if that's the way we want to go and you push society to do that, we will have found solutions. I'm convinced of that.
Bram, if we need to speed up the process for more energy from renewable sources, is this possible without subsidizing everything?
Can I first say something about gas?
Yeah.
Because we really have to wake up a bit here. I think it was a really interesting report or the preliminary results that we saw from Delta E. But we really have to realize that if you think that we're still going to use only 30% less gas in heating in 2050, you really don't understand or don't care about climate change and the Paris Agreement. So, of course, the study is what it is. But if this is going to be the position of the gas industry, I mean, it's good to be clear and transparent about that. So if that's your position, which is of course a question, and I hope that this is also a forum to debate this, but you cannot combine the two. We're going for a 3 or 4 degree warming in this kind of approach. So you really have to be aware of that. So that's one thing. I think the alternatives are there. It's going to be a mixture of electrification with heat pumps and district heating and some other technologies, and through innovation can lead to other developments. But basing long-term investment decisions, for example, on transport and distribution, on the assumption that you're going to use that much in 2050, risks to be a very risky investment.
Stephen,
I'll say that.
is it a risky investment?
I absolutely agree with Bram. I mean, the forecast that we showed there was, it's like the initial results, and Delta knows that by 2050, that's nowhere near the carbon target reduction that we're aiming for. So I think the next iteration for us is to consider like what other kind of interventions do we need to see happening that could be plausible to get that endpoint down. Part of the reality with the residential heating market is that any appliances that get installed in the next 5 years or so, which are likely to be gas boilers, they'll still be here in 15 or 20 years' time unless there's some kind of subsidy or push to encourage customers to change again to something else. So I absolutely agree that the chart we showed, I think that endpoint, of course, will be challenged. It doesn't get us anywhere near the carbon reduction targets we need to aim for. Our next bit of analysis is trying to look at the what-ifs, so what could get us closer to those targets. But I think, come back to the point I made earlier, I think there needs to be a recognition amongst the customers or consumers that something has to change, and that a lot of these costs will have to trickle down to everybody. Otherwise, I think it'll be quite difficult for us to get to a very low carbon future.
Rudy van Buren, we'll only get the targets right for climate change if we subsidize?
I think subsidizing is distorting the market. That's I think, a starting point, and everybody agrees. And so if you look at today's prices, electricity prices, a lot of things are now just there because of subsidies. So probably we will still need some subsidies. We have to be very, very careful because every new technology will probably need initially some support. I think mainly we need more support in R&D and not only in one technology. As you probably know, also in the gas sector, we're now looking to solutions for power to gas. It will not go as such into the market. I don't say that you will need support for 20 years neither. So we have to be very careful. Subsidies are a tool, as is taxation is a tool that the government can use. It has to be a combination and see who is paying for that. And I think that is the biggest issue. How much will it cost? and who will pay ultimately for it? Industry has well, they have to remain competitive. People living in their houses, they want to still drive their car and want to heat their houses. And so I think this is also a major concern. And I think this is now popping up the last days. And this just at the same time when we'll have now the negotiations now in Poland next week. But I think we all can contribute, and we have to think very carefully how we progress. And not because I saw also from Bram, a very good presentation, some technologies which are not mature, but maybe have a big potential. So we should look further into that. So power to gas, for example, there are now some studies done by the Polytechnic University of Lausanne, where you can go from power not to hydrogen to methane by combining an exothermic and endothermic process to efficiencies up to 80%. Which is very nice. There are also new technologies for carbon sequestration with new membrane technology, where they say, well, we could now achieve probably a cost of probably 50 euros a ton. So then we come into the range of what is the price of CO2 maybe tomorrow. And so we have to explore this and put some effort in that, not by simply subsidizing what we think will be the solution for tomorrow. So battery technology, a lot of research is being done, and a lot of billions have been used. Probably we'll need some more, and certainly, but don't forget the other technologies. And for example, if you want to gain CO2, it's not only looking gas, it's looking at efficiency. And if you have an old house, a stock where it's very difficult to isolate, where it's very difficult to put an electric heat pump, probably the best thing is replace it by a very efficient new generation gas heat pump. And that probably you will gain much more at probably a price which is more affordable. So there's no one single solution. We have to look at everything. And so new houses, probably in a few years, they will not need a lot of energy. And even then, an electric heat pump is maybe too expensive because you don't need the energy. So I don't advocate one solution, but what I advocate is we have to look at all solutions and work together and bring forward what we can bring forward as an industry. And I think the gas industry has knowledge also to be part of this future.
A lot of investment is needed, subsidizing will be needed, maybe in future CO2 will be taxated. The question, of course, is, if you look specifically at the residential sector and at the end consumer, will they be able and willing to pay for something that is more costly than today, or will be the next phase that we get yellow vests in the streets who are striving against the rising energy prices? Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the research we do, it's really trying to understand customers and what drives their behavior. The upfront cost of these appliances has always been the #1 barrier, and secondary to that's probably the energy cost savings. I don't know for how much longer that upfront cost can be blamed. So I absolutely agree. I think the more investment in R&D and like really driving down the prices of these technologies, that is needed. I think it's going to be quite a few years before customer willingness to pay for these appliances increases. But I think if climate change worsens or if more unique events happen, I think that's just going to raise the importance of this in customers' minds. But yeah, it's the disposable income that they have will always be quite a limiting factor in all of this. So there is no one solution. If between today and tomorrow we could shift from everybody buying gas boilers to everybody buying something else, then of course economies of scales will drive that cost down. But yeah, I don't quite see what the quick solution will be. It needs to be education of public, of installers, investment in improving these technologies, investment in the supply chains, improvements in the efficiency of the stock itself. There's lots of small things that can add up to try and make this work. I think that customer willingness to pay for some of this will always be quite a big challenge, but I think that will decrease with time.
Okay, we need to wrap up. I have one final question for each and every one of you. In 2 phrases, what's your conclusion of this morning's talks? Peter.
For 2050, we don't have the solutions today. We need research and development in order to make sure we can make the right choices for 2050.
Thank you. Bram?
We have what we need to make some decisions. We need to talk a little bit more, but not too long.
Stephen?
Yeah, this event's called Talk About Gas. I think it was Talk About Gas and Electricity. That could be quite a positive thing. But I think the more of these debates and discussions and considering things together, whether it's vectors or the different sectors, I think that's what needs to happen.
Gauthier?
Yeah, I think that indeed, I mean, somehow we've seen some progress in the last decade in the progressing of renewable technology, but there's still a long road to go up to 2050. But there's still some reason to be optimistic because we have more or less in mind what is needed. It's true that now we need to develop those and try to see the same kind of benefit as we saw for electric renewable, but there is no, I mean, we can still be optimistic about reaching an energy transition not too costly.
Rudy?
I would say let's all work together to achieve the targets of 2050. But don't forget that today we already can do a lot of things which cannot be forgotten. And we, as a gas sector, we are certainly part of that.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking part in this discussion.